Hello, this is Keith Elliott. Welcome to episode number 2 of FlipAgain development with React. We are starting out creating a to-do app. Ultimately, we will create a flashcard app available via flipagain.io. But in the meantime, we are walking before we're running. We're learning as we go, and we are learning to think in React. In the last episode, we stepped through the Thinking in React article on the reactjs.org website. We created a mock, which is a picture of the app, and sketched the data that we will have, and chunked the mock into React components and named the components, and finally built a static version. So our mock we drew on our virtual whiteboard. Here it is. It was getting quite sloppy after marking it up. And we also converted this to a component hierarchy, just a outline form of the components that we envision creating for this app. And we created our static version, static being that it doesn't have dynamic behavior, it doesn't change. It's just a representation of our virtual whiteboard here. All right, so let's first go fire that up. Here I am in the app root directory, and we are using yarn and redwood. Again, RW is short for redwood. And dev is the command to start the development server. So we'll kick that off. And as that's moving, let's walk through a couple notes. So in addition to thinking in React, the next core theme here, or to do, is add state. State. So state is data. State is information that control or defines the state or the way an application looks or a component looks. And we have state, and we also have props. Part of the thinking and the encouragement from the doc here is to essentially wear out the props. So one of the principles that I've really taken away is wear out the props. Use props when you can, and then when you've reached the limit of the props, then head over to state. And so as a start, the first thing we need to do right now is we still can do a little bit more with props. We can actually add a little bit of dynamic behavior with props, or call it calculated. I would say the close cousin to props is calculated values. Calculated vals, like the length of an array, for example. So if you can calculate it, the general guidance is don't store it as data in state. All right, so let's keep powering through. Our app started. If we pop back over to the web browser, and here it is. Again, very humble beginnings. Not much to look at here. I did add a little bit of dynamic behavior as a practice, and I will we'll walk through that. I made the move down button dynamic. So why don't we just go walk through that now, and then we'll make the move up button dynamic. Dynamic in that if you can't move up, it should not allow you or be clickable. So it's in the move down. I made the move down button not clickable if it's the last item in the list. All right, so that's just an example of a way to create very modest, say, dynamic behavior via, say, props and calculated values, not necessarily state. And so we need to do that. I think the only one I can think of is do the same equivalent thing for move up. So let's look here at move down, the move down implementation, and then also we'll glance at move up. So if we pop back over, got to head over to a terminal, and I'll fire up VS Code. I've got a few windows open. So our move down component, and I will also routinely pop over to our component hierarchy. Button move down. I've been playing with the names too. We originally, in the prior episode, named these ToDo button move down versus, I say, just move down. After reading more on the article, on the Thinking in React article, one of the themes also is, I'll just write down some of these themes. One of the themes is name components based on what they do. I don't know, say on their purpose. That is not necessarily their context. The goal is reuse components. Certainly with code in general. That's always a goal. Reuse code. And naming can be part of that. So just in this drive to ultimately create habits that allow us to create reusable components, we will belabor our naming. And so some of the components, to be sure, are fairly generic. Components that represent buttons. In a perfect world, these buttons can be used in whatever app. So let's see. In my sketch here, I removed the to-do prefix, but I haven't done that in real life. And we're working through all the painful details of this. I'm trying to provide a glimpse of, say, real life development. If you're fairly new to this game like I am, it would have helped me a year ago to sit down with somebody and watch them just power through a lot of this. So that's what I'm doing. It may be painful, but sometimes coding is painful. So let me rename this. It's grunt work, to be sure. So I'm going to rename the button here, or the component name here. Now I need to rename the file name. So I'll just have to rename that. And VS Code will automatically update imports that rely on this. Since this is a little, call it example app, I'll just go ahead and say yes. I'm always a little nervous about magic things happening to my code. And so we updated the file name. We also need to update the folder name. So let's do that. Yes. And I didn't mention this last episode, but Redwood provides a .stories file also, .stories.js and a .test.js. Stories are it's a skeleton that helps set up Storybook, which is a tool that we will get to eventually. And then the test.js file is a unit test that we can run via jest, and we can get to that eventually also. And the goal with this app is just get yourself thinking in React, and get her sea legs on to be sure there's testing and robust, say, development activities that we're skipping in this simple version. All right, so I renamed that. Then we need to go rename the components that use it. So most of them are open here. So what did we rename? We just renamed the button move down. Oh, this opened, I guess, because it was automatically updated. Let me just shut this off. Whoa, wrong button. That just, so Alt F4 shuts down VS Code. F4, I think, shuts down the component. Again, this is the sausage making. I'll fire it back up. Okay, Control F4 zaps the file, it closes the file, and Control F4 to close that. All right, so now let's check out what we have open. The table, the to-do, let's work our way up in the component hierarchy. The component that calls or includes this button move down is to-do table row. So let's go there. And to-do table row, the import was imported here, button move down. And the name, though, needs to change. Another wacky observation here is Redwood.js will auto-import folders or components for you. And in this particular file, it imported them in this format. It works. It's just called unconventional. I don't know what the scoop is, but it works, and I'm not gonna mess with it. So let me just update the button component names, and here we are cooking. So I updated that. I'll save it. The to-do table row is also, I think this is the only place where the button name needs to change. So let's go back to the app. A good habit that somebody coached me on in the past is to anticipate what the output or the app should look like before you look at it. And so we'll get into that habit. And I think right now we should see the same thing. It should just work, and we can refresh it and it should just work. We should not see errors. So I think we didn't break it. Let's go look. And that's it. If I hold down Control R to refresh, it's fine. Okay, that's fine. So we renamed it. I will hold off on renaming the other buttons now, but I will after we wrap up. Okay, so let's go to the Move Up button and implement this feature. The feature is we want to disable it if it is the first item in the list. Actually, back up. We never looked at how we did it here. So let's just look at how we did it in the Move Down button. Okay, so in the Move Down button, we pass in the item index and also the to-do list length. And quite simply, we add an attribute to our button, a disabled attribute, and it equals a Boolean, true or false. And that Boolean value is determined by comparing the item index with to-do list length -1. That's it. And so up above, we need to pass this information down through the component hierarchy. There's another concept that we'll hear often is data flows down, not up. So data flows down. And so oftentimes, if here in this component, it's one of the bottom, or say leaves in this tree of components, and data is flowing to it, and generally data doesn't flow the other way. So one-way data is is a theme we'll hear routinely in React development. So we've got to trace up where these two items are, you say, rooted, and make sure they're making their way. And a common bug that I've experienced is forgetting to pass a prop somewhere along the way. Okay, so let's move up to just keep popping over to our component hierarchy, to the table row. Boom. To table row, and it works, though it's all working here because we just tested it. But in this to-do table row, it also will accept an item index and a to-do list length, and I pass these two items on through to the button move down component. All right, so now let's go up one more. The to-do table row lives in the to-do table component. Let's go find that. Control KZ zooms us in here, and the to-do table maps over our to-dos that are passed in as a property, and here in the callback function within the map function, we dynamically determine the to-do list length. So this is an example of, say, a calculated variable. It's something that we can set a property to a calculated variable and pass it to where we need it, or we can use it instantaneously, but it should not be set to state. So that's how we did it. And next, let's go ahead and now zoom over to our move up button. All right, so let's open the button. Escape gets us back here. To do button move up. We will, let's see. So we do need to know the item index. And I prefixed, we could just call it index, but I like long variable names personally. Maybe they're too long. But it's the index of this item. And we will add a disabled attribute. It should be disabled if, and is it? I don't know if it has a D on the end. We'll see. It should be disabled if it's the first one in the list. So if the item index is 0, then don't show it. All right, so I'll save this. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but we didn't pass down the prop. So it's certainly not working, but I often, after making any code update, I'm often in the habit of going to look at the app to see what it does, and it doesn't look different. It doesn't look different at the moment, but unless it doesn't work. It didn't obviously didn't disable this because we're not done. So we need to pass item index on down. So back up one component, and that component is the table row, to-do table row, and our to-do button move up will need our item index. There we go. And item index is already passed to the to-do table row, so we should be cooking. So now when I save this, we go back to our app, the top button should be grayed out. And it's not. All right, let's see what happened. I imagine that the name of the attribute that I was pondering is actually disabled, and it is. So this is the attribute name, JSX attribute, and in my move up button, I misnamed it. It has a D on the end of it. Okay, I guess lesson learned. I'm not seeing the, anyway, I could use the autocomplete to help save a bug or two. Okay, so now if I see it, let's flip back over to the app, we should see the top button grayed out. And there we go, top button's grayed out. Cool. Okay, so one more thing that I want to do before we move on is think about how we map over this array. So in the, where do we do it? In the table. Here in the table, we map over this array. I have had bugs where I've tried to map over something that was a null or not an array. And so let me show you what where I've been bitten. Let's cause an error and then we'll go fix it. So on the home page, we defined our to-dos object array and passed it in as a prop to our app. If we comment that out and add something else that's not an array, the app should crater. Voila, it craters. But we can make it not crater. So let's make it not crater. Let's go back to our table, to-do table. And something I studied up on after burning a whole lot of time on a bug like this is what happens, or how do you make a component not run? And I believe here in the docs, conditional rendering. So I studied up on conditional rendering, and what I'll give you the tilde version. If you return null, if a function returns null, then it is ignored. So what we can often do is check for the presence of needed data or a type, and if it's not what you expect, return null. And if that's reasonable behavior, then that may be just fine. And in this case, it would be. If it doesn't have, if we don't get what we need, let's just return null, so we don't show the world a big ugly error message. Okay, so to do that, I'm just right here in the top going to add an if statement. If let's see, not there. Alt shift it down. So within the function component, if to-dos equals null or to-dos what is it? Array is array. To-dos. If to-dos is null, or if it's not an array, return null. Otherwise, keep trucking. So now when I save this, we pop back over, we should see the top part of the app. If I go look at of course the web page ought to show up, and then the root of the app also, which I don't yet have open. Let me open that. To-do app. The to-do input component should execute just fine, and the to-do table component, actually, it'll execute just fine too, according to our current behavior, and it just doesn't do anything if it doesn't have the data that it needs. at least according to the basic check. So let's go look at the app, and voila, nothing happened. So the rule, I can't help it. I'm telling you all the things where I've burned time chasing bugs. So if a component returns null, or I guess renders null if it's a class component, then yeah, nothing, void. So you can simply not, React will ignore components if null is returned. However, though it's not undefined, you don't get the same behavior with undefined. In my simple mind, I was thinking I could return undefined and React wouldn't, it would just ignore it, but that's not the case. It threw a big ugly error. So just remember, if you don't want the component to do anything, return null, don't return undefined. Okay? All right, next, let's keep powering through it. Let's go back and turn our real data back on. And we can do more robust testing, and eventually we'll get there. But for now, I'm just trying to implement a little bit of, call it defensive code. And the other thing that we'll do is convert this to TypeScript, which helps catch bugs like this where we think we have a certain type of data, but we may not. But that will all come in the endless learning curve of web application development. Okay, so where are we now? So we did it. I think we've worn out props. Again, in this theme of thinking in React, step one is build your static version with props, no state allowed. I highlighted here what I thought was a pretty important note. We'll want to build the components that reuse other components and pass data using props. So part of building a reusable component is using props. Props are a way of passing data from parent to child. And in the static version, the guidance was don't use state at all to build the static version. State is reserved for interactivity. That is data that changes over time. All right, and we talked also about there's a top and there's a bottom, and there is a one-way data flow. One-way data flow. Cool. All right, so it's time to start implementing state. Identify the minimal but complete representation of UI state. Okay, so we'll go, we did this last episode, but we'll do it again. We'll just pause here and look at what state exists. We can even look at we can look at the app. Of course, we have our item. It has this inherent order, which really is state. That is whether it's index position 1 or 0, 1, etc. It has the name. We will toggle done. Those are the state items. Essentially, what we passed in as a prop in the static version. Let's yank out of here, and we will define it as this is the state. This will be our default state. All right, so, and I'm pretty sure this is the minimal amount of state. I tried to run through this mental exercise of, thinking about the minimal representation, and I think we're there. So let's do it. So as I mentioned, let's take the data that we were passing in. I'm gonna Control X to zap it out of there, and we will not pass it in as a prop. We potentially could pass in default data, but I'm not. Let's go here to the app, and within the function component, we will define what we call initial state. We could do it elsewhere, but we are going to do that here. So here is our initial state. I'll call it initial to-dos. And then we will use hooks. The use state variable, or we'll use state. And somewhere along the way I picked up a little snippet library that helps facilitate that. So we have our state variable name called to-dos, and the initial state will be set to initial to-dos. Initial to-dos. And so this is a hook, state hook in particular, and if you're not familiar with it, you probably need to go spend a few hours, at least that's what I do, or did, to get familiar with it, studying up. You can find it in the docs. And we need to import it. It didn't auto import, so let's go ahead and import it. Import use state from React. And I will save it. And I think we're good to go. We don't need, a little squiggly helps, at least helps us keep our code clean. We're not passing it in, so no need to accept that prop that we're not using. We define our initial to-dos in a variable, and we set the initial state via the use state prop. This is the set to-dos function that we haven't yet put to use. But right now, we just pulled the props. We just moved our data from data that was moved in as a prop into a state variable. And the app should still work because at this level, the state now lives in the to-do app component. That's where I put it. We should talk about that. And then from there though, I just pass it down as a component, or excuse me, as a property. So the next thing to do, let's go look at our app and confirm that it's working. And I think it is, and it is. So Control refresh, Control R to refresh. It's working as it should have. It still is, not doing much of anything, but it's not broken. The coding and testing, at least little mini functional tests, are a great way to roll so you don't get too balled up and broken. Okay, next step. Let's go to the docs and think about this. So we've got our modest amount of data that we defined, and now we need to think about where the state should live. There's a good description here of where it should live. And as we see here in bold, this is often the most challenging part for newcomers to understand. So that's why you just need to do it and just work through it and work through the mental exercise of thinking through it. In this case, our app is very basic, and I don't think it's too challenging. If we look at the component hierarchy, we'll need to show in this row, for example, the to-do item, and it will need to know its index, etc. But this is but that's just part of a table of to-dos. So it's very natural to me that certainly a state shouldn't live down here. And the buttons, it should not live in the to-do table row. It could potentially live in the table, but I'll pop it back up one. It just feels like we should leave it here in the app, because the other, what you need to do is find a common ancestor. And the other chunk of functionality is the addition, the new, to do new, which will allow us to add a new to-do item. And that will certainly encompass some state. So if the state lived here, but its peer or sibling needs it, you can't do that. You got to go up. If you want to share between other apps or other components, you've got to store the state in the closest, highest ancestor, however you say that. All right, so we are going to store our state in to-dos. All right, so we thought through that, figuring out where it should live. Okay, and so ultimately, this really got me thinking. We will need to essentially send little messages back up. You know, I live in Alaska, and there are salmon that swim upstream in the summer, and even up waterfalls. And I think of that. We'll have to send little salmon upstream to send messages eventually. So with that picture in mind, let's do this. Data flows down. This is a big waterfall. And our little fishies sometimes need to swim up. How do you like that? I'm not quite an artist. All right, let's code. The first more complex functionality that we will add will be, let's say, remove. Say we washed the dishes and we want to make this button actually work. So let's implement the remove button. All right, so let's flip over to the whiteboard and think through it. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. We need to do something to the button. Our button that we click, the remove button. Need to update the code there. And then we'll need to update the state. So the two primary things that we'll have to adjust are the button and the state. And then there's glue. There's glue between the two, and we'll need to figure out all the glue to make it work. All right, so let's start here at the top, or the bottom rather. This button way down here, I called it delete, but we named it remove. Button remove will need to somehow send a message, say, to the state saying get rid of a certain item. All right, so there's our mental picture. Let's just bang this out. So let's open our button to do button remove. And again, I will rename these guys soon enough. Essentially, this is where we will start to use the ID. So we passed down the ID, and it will be used via an on-click handler or event handler. So React provides a scheme for handling events. And I spent an airplane ride studying this recently. So here we can learn all about it, but I'm trying to distill this down and not take 3 weeks. So onClick takes a handler, and the handler typically has a name. The name is typically handle click, and that handle click function needs to be passed in from above. So we'll pass in a function called handle click, and then the handle click function is where the onClick attribute is set to the handle click function. All right, and we'll just fill this out a bit. Here's the little bit of information that needs to head back up the hill. If we need to delete something, we need to know what to delete. And so this is the little trick to send information back up. You do it via handler functions. And then the other thing that Bytes has bitten me multiple times is you can't, this is not correct. What this does is it calls the function right there. You don't want that. You want to pass a function to the onClick attribute. And so hopefully that, if you remember that, you might save a couple hours. Okay, so now we've got to go figure this out. So let's go create this function, this handle click function. All right, so let's pop over to the ToDo app. So the handle click function is a handler that will also live. I think it naturally should live where the state lives. Handle click. So we will end up with a few of these, basically one for each button. And so the name, in my goal of making a button that's generic, I'll just call it handle click. If I give something an ID, if I give this component an ID and a handle click property, it should just handle it. But here in the context of the app, I need a more specific name so I can keep things straight. So I will call it handle click remove, and it will take an ID, and here it will set, this is where we will run the set ToDo's function that is defined right here. And that will take our, okay, we need to think through what this will take. So this, we need to send it the updated version of state. To hand it send it the updated version of state, we need to provide it a new, in this case we'll provide it a whole new array of items that is updated. And certainly for now, the built-in filter method should work for us. It works because it returns a new array. This doesn't elaborate, but I popped over here to MDN and brushed up on the array prototype filter method. And as I state in bold, this creates a new array. And that's one of the core themes with state. You don't mess with the state. You don't change state directly. You just replace it each time you need to update it. And some of these built-in JavaScript array methods mutate or change the array, and that's never what we need. So there's a package called Ramda that I like to use, which is say pure and doesn't manipulate the data that you send it. But we'll use the built-in one for now. All right, so to filter todos.filter, and we need to, let's see, we give it a callback, takes a to-do, and it keeps everything with the, I don't know, let's just do it. To-do dot ID equals ID. So this would remove, this would filter out everything. Honestly, I can't remember. I could practice on MDN first, but let's just try it. Let's see what this does. At the moment, it's not going to work because we haven't even passed this down. And what I'm wrestling with in my head is that, is this an equal to or not equal? I don't know. I always just try it and fine tune as I go. But we'll come back to that. So right now, we need to pass this handler all the way on down to our button. And to pass it, we pass it down as props, which starts to feel a little tedious, but nonetheless, this is kind of the base standard way to do it. So let's go ahead and pass this guy. We passed it down into our to-do table. Now let's go to the table. We have to now accept it in the props. This is where we're destructuring the props object. And so now we have it here. And we need to pass it on down to our to-do table row. And then, so let's pop into the to-do table row. We need to make sure we destructure it. And finally, where am I? We're removing this guy. Finally, we pass it to our button. And the button, remember, we called it handle click. Handle click is the attribute name of our attribute in this component, and it doesn't care what you name it. It's sending kind of the contents of that variable or function name. And within the curly braces, that is. So, and then the to-do button component should be in good shape. When we save this, it'll make it all prettier. I use prettier, which is built into Redwood.js. It just works, and so it makes it pretty when you save. Okay, will this work? No. Well, there's two chunks. There's kind of gluing all of the data together. It's like this. This is part of it. This can be a tedious part. Call it the glue. And then there's the core logic of updating the state, which I was wrestling with, and I think we got the glue done. Let's think about what the app should look like now. It's either going to show, well, right now it should just look the same. So let's go look at it. It should look exactly the same. All right, but now we're done with the dishes. If we click it, okay, it did opposite what we wanted to do. We wanted to delete or remove everything except wash dishes, but it did opposite that. So let's go fix that. If we go back to the implementation of our handler function, I can just change this to not equal to. So I'll save that. React or Redwood.js is watching changes. Just FYI, it's in the dev version, every time I save, the server refreshes. Okay, so now when we hit the button, wash dishes should be gone. But ta-da, it worked. Okay, cool. Good deal. Okay, that took forever. But I think we're in a groove, and now we know how to do it. So we will need to do that again for the move buttons and for the toggle button. It's been 50 minutes though. Time flies when you're coding and having fun. So I think it's time to wrap up. And if you're like me and relatively new to it, this can, it takes time to just absorb a lot of this stuff. Let me wrap with some useful resources. Of course, we glanced at MDN. I'm visiting MDN daily. So it's a good resource. Of course, we're wearing out the docs. And in part so that I don't look too silly, and also because I just have to reread these things over and over. I've spent hours in the last few days reading the docs again, probably for the 5th time. But they're starting to gel. And another concept that what we just did is when we were thinking about where to put the state and how to, say, send a message via the handler function to update the state, what we were doing was lifting state up. And there's a whole article here regarding lifting state up. And so that's helpful. And finally, another really great resource that I often frequent are the docs and blog posts from Robin Weirick. Shout out to Robin. I don't know you, but I really devour your blog posts. They're right up my alley in terms of where I am in my development journey. Essentially, he's explaining, his docs and these docs are often saying the same thing but in a different fashion. And what I'm hopefully trying to do is say the same thing in yet a different fashion, in the hopes that it will help you more rapidly get your head around these things and thrive as a developer. Okay, I enjoyed making a little progress. Boy, this feels slow. So all we did was we implemented our buttons. They all work. That's cool. I'll refresh and get them back. We haven't implemented any of the others. So what I'll do now is I'll clean up some of the naming here, and I'll study up so I don't make you watch me think and pause too much. And then in episode 3, we'll just keep on trucking through this and implementing the remaining buttons. All right, hope to see you there. Have a great day. Bye-bye.